Today's movie review is That Haunted Castle from 1921. And this is a film from F.W. Murnau. And here's some essential movie details about this movie. So, this movie was shot in 16 days and released before the serialized novel's last chapter had been printed. And so, this story, The Haunted Castle, was printed in a magazine called the Berliner Illustraten. It's a German newspaper. So I think that's interesting how the movie actually came out before the book did. The last part of the book did. So, like, Harry Potter comes to mind. Like, there are movies nowadays that kind of do that. Or even TV show wise, like, I've never seen it, but you hear Game of Thrones, right? There's still more stories to tell, but it got to a point where the TV show kind of went past where the books were at. So I think that's kind of cool that even back then, that kind of thing was happening. Another detail from retrospective reviews, so from Sight and Sound, that's a famous website, they stated, no one is ever going to rank this film, The Haunted Castle, a major Murnau film, but this is his oldest surviving film, and it's worth watching for signs of his still evolving film language, noting the use of flashbacks, comedy elements, and such different traits that Murnau was known for later on in his career. And so those are kind of some of the behind the scenes details and information about the movie. So now I'll give you my thoughts on the film. So the plot, I gave a 2 out of 5. I agree kind of the sentiments of Sight and Sound. This was not a great plot, great film that would be up there with like Faust, for example. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. I just thought it was just an okay, not great plot. I didn't really have any real investment or interest in any of the characters or anything that was going on with them. They were in this, it's kind of a similar setup to a later film, The Old Dark House, which I reviewed a few months ago, in that you're pretty much in the same set the whole movie. If I'm not mistaken, this movie takes place over maybe 1 or 2 days. I could be mistaken, but so it's a very kind of claustrophobic film to kind of add a little sense of terror. But honestly, there's nothing haunted about the castle. There's just weird people. I guess that makes it haunted. And I kind of had the same critique with the Old Dark House. There's nothing really, really creepy about it. And this is just, I would say, kind of a normal castle. There's nothing really haunted about it. There's no ghosts. There's nothing like that to make it scary or whatnot. So I think the title's a misnomer. Now, it is the American title. I'm not entirely sure what the German exact translation would be. So maybe that's just a fault of the title, because honestly, I didn't get that impression at all. I thought it was going to be like a Universal monster type movie where like there's creepy stuff going on at the castle. But honestly, just the characters, like one character was trying to figure out who murdered her husband. It was more of a murder mystery than it was a horror film. And honestly, the only element I really liked in the plot was the twist ending where we find out the real identity of the Reverend. But that's about it. I don't really care about anything else of the story. All right, so then let's move on to acting. So the acting, I gave the acting a 3 out of 5. I thought it was just okay. Let me pull up the chart here. There we go. The main lady who's pictured on the right here, who's trying to find her husband's murderer and whatnot, I liked her. I thought she was very expressive, very animated, very reminiscent of the German Expressionism, more silent film style of acting. I thought she was fine. That's really about it. Like I was mentioning, I didn't really connect with any of the characters. There's no one I was really rooting for, even with her. It just felt kind of disconnected, very clinical, I would say. Because a later film he made, Faust, which just came out 4 years later, that one I really, really liked that character and really liked that story. It's one that I think we could all connect to, of the idea of, making a deal with the devil and making mistakes and whatnot, and then coming out on top at the end and owning up to them, right? I really liked that element in that film. This movie doesn't really have anything like that. Just moving something out of the way here real quick. But yeah, this movie's missing an element like that, and I wish I had some character, somebody that I really wanted to connect with, but I didn't find that with anybody. So that's why I gave the acting a 3 out of 5. All right, let's move on to directing. So directing wise, so F.W. Murnau, he made this film. Like I was mentioning, I think Faust is a better movie by him, and even Sunrise, which is another film he made in 28. That was a better movie. This movie, it didn't have any of the gothic scenery and cinematography and characters you want to connect with that his later films did, even just a couple years later, like I keep mentioning with Faust. This feels very limited, very rushed, and very inexperienced. I mean, like it said, they filmed this film pretty quickly. I want to say it was like 15, 16 days. That's insane turnaround, right? You could kind of feel that. It feels more like a stage play than it does a movie, which is unfortunate because he had such big bombastic movies just a couple years later. So I'm wondering kind of when that changed in his career. So I wasn't really impressed. And I just kept thinking about his other movies that are much grander and bigger than this one was. And so that's why I gave it a 2 out of 5. All right, next. We were talking about cinematography and special effects. So I gave that a 3 out of 5. I thought it was good, but we are in the same set piece pretty much the whole movie, kind of like in the old dark house. It's really just in the same spot. We're just mainly in the castle. But I don't know. This, like I was saying, it feels more like a stage play than an epic crime thriller. There were some cool close-ups and whatnot, but to me, this really didn't have the creative edge that I think Murnau really was known for later on, because it really felt repetitive with a lot of the shots. Even the cool little miniature for the castle, it was at the same angle, and really you could tell they were just changing the lights on the stage. It didn't feel big and bombastic like the city that the demon is looking over in Faust, for example, or even just the simple farmhouse in Sunrise. Like that movie had great stuff too. So the only cool scenes I really like are kind of similar to this one, where characters are walking towards the camera centered, and it kind of gives an interesting perspective. I thought that was pretty cool, but that's about it. And that's why I gave it a 3, because it wasn't horrible, but nothing epic, if that makes sense. So now let's move on to the music. So as is the case with many silent films, the music, it's kind of hit and miss. Sometimes it's the original score, sometimes it's not. I know in this case it was, because Kino Lorber restored the movie from several different elements, different prints of the movie, and found the original score and re-recorded it. So that was fine. I just didn't like it, and I gave it a 3 out of 5. It's just okay. It does set the tone pretty nicely, especially towards the end of the film when we kind of figure out what's really going on. I thought that was pretty interesting, where we find out who the Reverend really is. But honestly, it's just kind of repetitive and kind of annoying, and not really a score I would want to listen to all the time. And it's done on the piano too, which a lot of silent film scores were. And so I felt that was kind of lacking here, especially compared to Faust. I mean, I keep bringing it up, but it's such an epic movie, and it's so much better than this in so many ways that I was so disappointed when I saw this movie. All right, so that's why I gave the music a 3 out of 5. So finally, overall, the Letterboxd score, I gave it a 2.6 out of 5, which I'm rounding to a 3 out of 5. Barely. It's barely a 3 out of 5. Very close to being a 2.5. And that brings it to a Criticlist score of 52%. So would I recommend this movie? Honestly, no. Stick to Sunrise by F.W. Murnau. Stick to Faust. I haven't seen all of Nosferatu, so I can't bring that one up as an example, but I hear it's a good horror film. So stick to those movies. This is not as compelling as his later work is. And I imagine that the American title is what kind of misled me. Again, I don't know the exact translation of the German one, because I thought it was going to be a horror movie like The Old Dark House or a Universal Monster movie, but it's not. It's more of a crime thriller or a drama than a horror film. Nothing fantastical, nothing crazy or anything like that. But yeah, overall, pretty disappointing movie considering how great of a director it was. All right, so those are my thoughts on The Haunted Castle from 1921, and that's today's movie review.